Good morning from the Gold Coast of Australia. Welcome back to the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge podcast with myself, your host, Alex Connor, where we talk everything training, nutrition, and lifestyle collectively. And as promised, we're back with another guest this week. And this episode, quite a special one for me, as this individual has impacted my career very positively. He was someone who first inspired me and got me onto the good knowledge, quote unquote, if you like, and that is Dr. Eric Helms. And many years ago, it was about 7 years ago, I was scrolling through the pages of Simply Shredded, trying to find a better way because I was doing things not so intelligently, trying to get peeled, and I stumbled across Matt Ogus, actually, of all people, and he was doing a lot of social media at the time. He was actually getting Eric to guest on a lot of his videos, and I followed that back through the rabbit holes, if you like, to 3DMJ, where Eric was very prevalent. He was obviously putting a lot of information out there, and from there, that was the change, if you like, or the shift between, searching in the dark and then sort of having a torch. And you just continually build and grow over time, and that torch and that light gets brighter and you start to uncover more. And once you find someone like Eric, you generally find the rest of the team good guys, if you like. Your Lane Nortons, your Mike Zordoses, etc. And it definitely changes the way you think and approach your training protocols. Now, in this conversation, we take a closer look behind the man who is Eric Helms. We talk about what he learned in his recent competition preparation period. We talk about his mission statement, what he has and continues to achieve, but also we talk about a lot of the grey areas of bodybuilding, physique sports, and sports science alike. And a little bit more about Eric, for those of you who may not be aware, and you're welcome now. In addition to some coaching, Eric Helms, the PhD, CSCS, is the Chief Science Officer of 3D Muscle Journey. He ensures that 3DMJ stays up to date with the best practices and acts as a science communicator, helping lifters find sustainable pathways to high performance. Eric does a lot of research at the Sports Performance Institute of New Zealand. That's AUT, Auckland University of Technology, for those of you over the pond, pursuing research in training, nutrition, and psychology for strength and physique sports. Eric is a PhD in strength and conditioning, with a research focus on autoregulating powerlifting, a master's with a research focus on protein and macronutrient manipulation for dieting bodybuilders, and a second master's in exercise science and health promotion. He also has a bachelor's in sports management, fitness, and wellness, and he's also an athlete himself. As previously mentioned, Eric earned pro status as a natural bodybuilder with the PNBA back in 2011. He's a raw powerlifter in the IPF, and he dabbles in weightlifting too. So as you can tell, many hats this gentleman wears, and someone who continues to do phenomenal work within the industry. I think he's someone who influences the physique sport world and the strength sport world. He's someone who's got a lot of character, a lot of personality. He's got a great sense of humor, and he's someone who thinks about things from a more holistic perspective, which I think is what makes Eric very diverse and be able to communicate his information across so successfully. Now, as always, guys, before we dive in, thank you for all the support. If you like listening to these podcasts, make sure you leave a rating and a review on your chosen media platform. But without further ado, enjoy this conversation with Dr. Eric Helms. Eric, welcome to the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge podcast. I appreciate it. Thank you for making the time this morning. How's it over there in New Zealand?
Well, it's my absolute pleasure to be on. It is wonderful in New Zealand. It is a little chilly, hence the beanie. But mainly, I think if I took the beanie off, my hair would be looking crazy. So I'm just keeping it on for the aesthetics of my hair.
I thought you were going to do a Brian Whittaker, the old shredded, with the beanie and just the little black shorts. Maybe you were going in for one of those photo shoots or something.
I did those with Jeff Nippard. So I got those on the gram back in June at UABC. So yeah.
Right. I saw those recent photos as well, actually, which is I think it was the classic bodybuilding.
Yeah. I got the professional photos back from my last show just on August 10th. I did here in New Zealand, and there's a couple ones that look pretty cool. So yeah, that was
Looking pretty juicy, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Yeah, I was very proud of the season. It went very well, so couldn't be happier.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something I'd love to talk to you about a little bit more. But before we dive into that, Eric, for those of you, for those listening who are not aware, shame on them. Can you give us a bit of a background, a bit of a bio as to who you are, what you do now, and even if you want, how you sort of ended up in the position you're in now?
Sure. I think probably the place to start is, what is my mission statement? What am I about? What am I attempting to accomplish? So my personal mission statement is to provide support to the lifting community and help them achieve sustainable performance. So that means, using like eco-friendly cups when they have protein shakes. No, I'm just kidding. Sustainable performance. Sustainable performance is really about the long-term, big picture, holistic perspective. So, it's not like we as bodybuilders, powerlifters, or strength athletes, or people who lift, typically get into this like in high school. You might play football or baseball or cricket or rugby in school, or as a young child, and get exposed to sport that way. But no one plays on the bodybuilding team for their high school, So what that means is that we get into this as adults, typically by our own choice, whether that's, anything in the iron game, and you're throwing sleeves, or you're buying a 10 millimeter belt, or you're getting, Dream Tan, and you're voluntarily seeking out these amateur mom and pop organizations, entering it and competing just purely out of the fact that you love it. And you love lifting so much that it turned something competitive. And I've seen an unfortunately high number of incidences where people will eventually burn out from that. And I can't think of something that's much more tragic, that an adult who got into something so much they loved it and did all this crazy crap, risking disc injuries and eating disorders to do what they love, then burns out on it. So I think my whole purpose is to help people find, sustainable performance, so that when they're Grandmasters 3 competitor, they're still getting up there on the platform or on the stage, or at the very least still in the gym lifting and loving it. And that intersects a lot of places. That means that I'm going to provide an evidence-based approach. That means I'm going to leverage the best rational skepticism has to offer, which is science, whether that's exercise physiology, coaching psychology, nutritional biochemistry, what have you. And then I'm also going to be leveraging history, so we can learn about where we've been and our culture, and understanding what do we need to do as a community to foster that and have better athlete care. That also means that I want to kind of lead by example, which is why I'm an athlete myself. But it's also just because I freaking love it. So I've done 17 powerlifting meets, 3 weightlifting meets. I've got my first strongman comp coming up in a week and a half, or 2 weeks. And I've done 13 bodybuilding shows. I've been competing since 2006, lifting since 2004. And it also means coaching, putting out content, being a science communicator, keeping my hand in research. So if we go all the way back to where my career started, I began as a kind of like a physical conditioning mentor in the U.S. Air Force back in 2002-ish. Wow. Just as a side gig. That wasn't my career in the Air Force. I was in military intel, but then quickly realized I didn't want to stay in military intel, got out and kept pursuing the fitness path, and became a minimum wage personal trainer / fitness staff at the YMCA in 2005. And now fast forward 14 years later, I have my PhD in strength and conditioning. I live in New Zealand, where I did my doctorate and my second master's at AUT, which is a great school for sports science. And I mentor master's and PhD students who are also muscle nerds in one way or another out here. And back in 2009, I started 3D Muscle Journey, which is our natural bodybuilding and raw powerlifting platform to help people find that sustainable performance, with myself, Andrew Valdez, Jeff Alberts, Alberto Nunez, and Brad Loomis. And along the way, I've collaborated on some other things. I've written some books, Muscle Pyramids with Andy Morgan and Andrea, kind of our one-stop shop for everything you need to know about setting up your training and nutrition and making adjustments over time. And I do a research review with the Stronger by Science crew, Eric Trexler and Greg Knuckles, as well as my good friend, Dr. Mike Zerdosa out of Florida. And so I've just got my hands on a lot of pies, basically practice, research, science communication, coaching, and the athletic experience, and trying just to provide support as best I can to all the above. And another part of that sustainable performance is doing it drug-free. Not that I have anything against athletes being enhanced. That is a personal choice. But I do think it's very difficult to have, an emphasis on sustainable performance when you're taking potentially harmful levels of drugs. So that's kind of my jam, and happy to be here.
Yeah. No, thank you. That was a really good summary, Eric, just to round out for people who have perhaps not heard you and sort of segue into all those elements. And it's fair to say you have a very sort of holistic approach in lifestyle towards the iron game, if you will. What I'd like to delve into now, as we spoke about a little bit off camera, is the gray areas of coaching, of the industry. And what I mean by that, guys, is that the things that are, it's not in the textbooks. It's not the coaching cues you hear of. It's the things that are perhaps swept under the carpet. And again, it's very much, and I use these keywords all the time, Eric, and I'm glad you used that one, sustainable. And it is my belief and my creed that with coaching, it has to be flexible. It has to be sustainable, and it has to be enjoyable. Now, you could probably come up with other words for those, but that's just the way I interpret it. And I believe if it doesn't meet that criteria, then it will never really work. So I'm very passionate about preaching that. And what I'd love to do is get your opinion and your experience from your background and not only what you've done in research, but what you've done with your clients and your own competition experience. So it might be appropriate to start with your previous or your recent competition experience, and maybe talk us through what you have done differently now versus in the past, and perhaps some of the coaching cues, which the obvious, but then the not so obvious things that you might have done with, Alberto, etc. And perhaps we can derive some things, and then we'll sort of follow that trail.
Absolutely. So I 100% agree that a certain level of enjoyment, and I would go so far as to say not just enjoyment, but fulfillment and meaning has to be derived from what you do for it to be something that someone does long term. Mm-hmm. A great example of this is, I think when I was in my early 20s, I probably couldn't understand why a Masters 3 competitor was still competing, because in my mind, my goal was to become Mr. Natural Olympia. That was what I'd been exposed to, the INBA. And I was like, oh, Philip Ricardo Jr., that's the goal. And I even remember saying to my wife, like, if I couldn't convince myself I had a shot at being the best natural bodybuilder in the world, or at least being among them, I don't know that I'd keep training, which was a very stark contrast to why I started training just 2 years prior. And to delve into some of the kind of the research side of this, there's a lot of data that shows as your focus becomes more extrinsic, that can actually sabotage your enjoyment. It can sap the intrinsic rewards you get from something. And this is a phenomenon that has been well researched for a long time. And I'll be very brief on this, but there was a study done back in the 70s called Undermining Children, basically undermining children's motivation. And it was all about looking at what happens when you take preschoolers who are currently drawing and you start rewarding them. And basically they made it into a contest. So they had 3 groups. One group, they just kept drawing and watched them as a control. One group, they didn't tell them they're going to reward them, but after a certain amount of time, the kids who were drawing the most got a reward, like gold sticker type thing, and they were ranked. And then another group, they told them, hey, you're in a drawing contest. Whoever draws the most gets the gold stickers. And at the end, when they checked back in months after this experiment, in the group that was told they're going to be rewarded and were entered into a contest, they had twice as many people who just stopped drawing after the contest was over, compared to the natural drop-off you'd have of kids who decide they either like to draw or don't, move along about their 4-year-old lives.
Yeah.
So you also see this in sport, where once someone turns professional, or once someone goes from lifting to competing, that they're not as able to derive as much joy from just the process of lifting, of getting stronger, of going in there, moving and playing, doing what's fun, to then thinking about, I got to be Mr. Central Valley 2019, or I've got to get a 400 Wilks, or I've got to squat 500 pounds, or I need to do whatever. And the key to sustainable performance is reconnecting with that underlying aspect. And then there's nothing wrong with wanting to win. Anyone who competes is doing it because they do want to win. And I absolutely would rather place first and second, don't get me wrong. But it's what percentage of my pie is going to be dedicated to that being the motivation. So for me, the process is kind of that foundation layer of the cake. The frosting is self-improvement, and then the cherry on top is the win. And I think a lot of athletes start with it kind of flipped on its head. And the first step is to get them to kind of realize, hey, it's really you versus you in an individual sport. But then, even then, why is that Masters 3 competitor still competing? If they're not as good as they were when they were Masters 1, but they're still out there doing their thing, that's because they love it. So they figured something out. They have that sustainable performance. They're the true devotee to the iron game who is dedicated. So I think that is a critical piece. That's a critical piece all the way from the soccer mom who's going to be exercising in her 70s, and then you might have started working with her in her 50s, and boom, you really truly changed her life by helping her find that. To the competitor who is not the guy in the gym who trains once a week, who told you how he used to bench 400, but now his shoulder hurts and and complains about how he just can't stay on the diet on the weekends kind of thing. Versus the guy who's competing in Masters 3 still and in great shape, and who all the other old guys don't get, so I think regardless of whether you have these insane lofty goals of having striated glutes at the age of 65, or whether your goal is to simply be healthy at 65 and able to play with your grandkids and run circles around most folks your age, I think it's the same. It's finding that meaning and that fulfillment. And that's what brought me back to competing. And also the reason why I took some time off. I didn't have a sense of urgency. I knew the stage was always going to be there. I knew that I'm a bodybuilder regardless. It's just a part of who I am at this stage. So my last season was 2011, and I'd competed in 09 and 07 before that. And I took, 8 years off because I was trying to do my master's, my second master's, and then my PhD. And then, recover from that. And then because I had been competing in weightlifting and powerlifting, I wanted to really make sure that I had the right setup. Because if I was going to get back on stage, I wanted to do it right. So my prep really began sometime in late 2016 when I began emphasizing bodybuilding training more, working around and getting hip surgery. That was something I knew I needed to do, and I finally did in early 2017. And then setting myself up for a very productive off season in 2017. And then in 2018, it was still an off season, but it was very much putting myself in the position to be successful. So I did a mini cut in April, a mini cut in September into early October, a maintenance diet where I would basically made sure I didn't have any diet fatigue. I was just eating ad libitum, but with good habits, and then started my prep in December. And it went all the way through till August 10th was my last show. So that was, I think, 34 weeks. And I competed in April, 2 shows in July, and a show in August. And I put a lot of meaning into the one. My good friend Brandon who's Andrea's partner, and also does a lot of really, really good artistic work. So he's a photographer. He does the podcast sound editing. He's we did a project which was an homage to Frank Zane, where I did some classic posing to try to kind of put that side by side to me saying, hey, this is someone I've always looked up to as an athlete and has just a really beautiful physique and what I think embodies some aspects of bodybuilding that I appreciate on the artistic side. It'd be cool to try to emulate that. Not come anywhere close to it, of course, but to really kind of show the respect and have fun with it, which is most important.
Yeah.
So anyway, I competed in April and did my first show, and that went great. Placed second to one of our own 3DMJ athletes. Looked the best I ever had on stage, so it ticked a lot of boxes. And man, I almost could have just hung up the season right there. I was so pleased with how that went. We did the Zane project. I hung out with friends. They supported me. We shared some time in Hawaii. And then, but I kept going because it had been 10 years since the formation of 3DMJ. Which happened, the seeds were planted with us talking backstage during our 09 season where I was competing and Jeff Alberts was competing. And Alberto Nunez and Brad Loomis had just competed in '08 and were then volunteering and hanging out at the same shows that Jeff and I were doing. Berto was kind of like my game day handler, if you will, and coach later in the season. So all of us talking backstage at what is now called the Muscle Mayhem started. Jeff and I were in the overall for fighting for a pro card in the Muscle Mayhem, which is a show back in '09 that was called the Cap City. And so our plan was for the 10-year anniversary of 3DMJ, Jeff and I would do that show again together. And we did, and it was awesome. And 2 weeks prior, I did a smaller show, which was, I had the fortune of winning, which is cool, University Classic. It's a newer INBF show, great show. And then came in 2 weeks later, did the Mayhem. Once again, placed second to one of our athletes, which is a really cool way to place second. Jeff placed second in the pros to WNBF heavyweight champion Sam Okinola. So we both had a really good showing. We celebrated the 10-year anniversary of 3DMJ. And then I came home and kind of did a victory lap by doing one more show so that my mom and my wife and my local friends here could see me compete at the NZ IFBB All National Champs. And yeah, it was a really, like you said, now getting kind of transitioned into like the gray areas of coaching. There was a lot of textbook stuff for the way I prepped. Looked right out of what I would say you do in the PTC collective, my add-on course that used to be called the SBS Academy, like what should you do to prep an athlete, right out of the muscle and strength, nutrition and training period, how do you periodize and deload and manage stuff. And that lasted about through my first show in April. And then to go from having boxy glutes with like one kind of medial glute striation to having that's what we call being legally shredded at 3DMJ. It's like no one would say you were out of shape for your show, but people in the know would say you could get leaner. Yeah. So to go from, I think I was maybe 83 on stage to being like 81 on stage, and having my lowest weigh-in be 79 versus my lowest weigh-in being like 81 and a half. That 2.5 kilo difference, man, A, visually it makes a huge difference, but B, it's a lot harder to get there, Yeah. And so the amount of energy that I was taking in for a competitor who's, a light heavyweight in the natural divisions, who's 6 foot, who trains 5 days a week and at certain times, and then how high I was able to walk my calories up when we did it, what my structure looked like, my training split, and the kind of lack of traditional cardio, I think would have a lot of people scratching their heads, but it really was what made a lot, given my situation, my individual characteristics as an athlete, and my previous experiences, having this be my 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th show. So it was pretty cool. It was a lot of gray, basically from May onward, and yeah, a lot of things where I know I'm monologuing here, but I think that the perspective is you need to understand there's a difference between textbook knowledge and experiential knowledge. Yeah. And that's true as a coach, that's true as an athlete. And they're not even which one's better or how do you juxtapose them. And they're different, you simply, adults learn by doing things, and you can kind of understand the lay of the land, the broad brush strokes. But when the rubber hits the road and you have to make decisions based upon what's happening and react and then game plan and predict and make coaching calls, that is all stuff that you only get from being in there, getting your hands dirty and learning these things. And some of it's even hard to articulate because it's something you learn from seeing a couple hundred people go through the process. Or in this case, somebody like Jeff Alberts, I've done 13 shows. Sure, he did his first show when I was, I think, 93. I would have been 10 years old, So he's done, three times the number of shows I've done, and actually prepped a lot more athletes as I've shifted more to a science communicator primary role versus coach. So yeah, I think that's the kind of perspective people don't always get. They want to ask me, well, how do you know to do that? Why would you do that? I haven't seen that in your book. And like, it's not the same thing, Yeah, we could speak in generalities. If I write a book, it has to some degree, potentially apply to anyone, And then I can't write, a 10-page booklet of recommendations with then 1,000 pages of when it doesn't apply, Yeah, But what I can do is I can kind of give you the broad brushstrokes. We can start with, if you don't know anything else about someone except the intermediate, novice, beginner, and this is their goal, and there's no reason to believe this, they wouldn't be an outlier, here's where you'd start. But guess what? It's going to change over time, even within the same individual over time. So I think that is almost the definition, which is even understanding that you need to be evidence-based, is that being evidence-based is not just science. There's two other pillars there. There's the preferences and the individual nature of the individual, and then there's also experience to help you apply those aspects.
Yeah, 100%. And it's good that you bring that up, because it can be now evidence-based, overused, possibly, bit of a buzzword, perhaps out of context a little bit. And it's having that experience, I think, keyword there, as you referenced with Jeff Alberts, to go, well, here's the science, here's where we start, the broad brush strokes. But when we get now to a more specific goal, i.e. bodybuilding, getting on that stage, that last bit, sometimes it's not about the science because it doesn't work. It's more about that experience of hands-on. Oh, well, this doesn't make sense, but it works. And if it works, it works. But it might not work for, Joe, Tim, Kerry. It's just, that's where that experience comes in as a coach. And even an athlete, when hey, this works for me, or this has worked for this athlete, or when I've seen these trends. Can you perhaps talk us through some of those like real life examples, maybe perhaps not only with yourself, but with the other 3DMJ coaches and also the athletes that you've been enabled to coach over the years?
Yeah, I'll give probably the most extreme example of myself. So I competed in April, real close to being shredded, but still, like we said, another 2.5 kilos to lose of body fat to really look alien. And for any American listeners, that's 5.5, 6 pounds. Which, if you know that's the difference between first and fifth. When losing that 6 pounds makes you like diced. So we had plenty of time to do that. The traditional approach would be, all right, you competed in April, we got July. Let's take a 2-week diet break and then just drop, half pound a week until we get there, or a pound a week. Like, eat the most we can, do the least amount of cardio, and slowly bring it in, and then we'll peak for your July 6th show. However, to lose that pound or pound and a half a week, we had to get down to, basically I had refeeds and low days. So for perspective, I was having, on my low days, to lose that moderate amount of weight loss, I would have been around 1,600 calories on my low days and around 2,500 calories on 2 to 3 days per week. And I'm not a very active guy, so that sounds crazy, but that's still that's like 11 kcals per pound per week, which is, to get shredded, that's very normal when you think about it. But that felt, at the stage we'd gotten to, that was like a 6 out of 10 difficulty. And I was like, you know what, Berto, to be honest, I don't want to feel like halfway beat up and shitty for for all of May, June, and in the first week of July. I've got like students, I've got jobs, I've got podcasts. What do you think about us getting down and dirty for a shorter period of time and losing faster? Because I think, honestly, it feels better. So I could see, like, let's dig hard for 4 weeks and then bring calories up and eat up into our shows. That's exactly what we did. So instead of being at that 1,600 to 1,800 calorie range where I'd be losing, a pound a week or less, we went to between 1,300 to 1,500 for 5 days with 2 high days, and pushed until we got to real close. And then I did 2 weeks. So I did 2 weeks of that, and then I did 2 weeks where I was on 5 days at 1,200 calories, and then 2 days at 2,500. And that's an average of like just under 9 kcals per pound. And that's absolutely not something I'd recommend, but it went from a 6 out of 10 difficulty to an 8 to 10 out of difficulty. And that was preferable for me for 2 weeks. It was brutally hard, don't get me wrong. But it was basically a protein modified fast with a couple pieces of fruit for the day and veggies and lean protein. And enforcing, like 10,000 steps per day, staying active to offset the lethargy that comes with that. Or I wasn't speaking, because that's another thing, is I'm not going to do this prep. I'm not going to let it someone else's life. And I've got clients, I've got students, I've got needs what it's like here, be present. And I had this 2-week stint. No one really, so zombie status. I'm solid. And I lost probably closer to 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds a week for those 2 weeks.
Whoop. Are you there?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know.
It didn't get recorded.
We're having a few connection issues, huh?
Do you know what the last thing that got picked up on the recording was?
Yeah, it was that you had dropped to 1,200 calories and you were talking about how that was feeling, and it was sort of cutting out from there. But it's okay. It says we're still recording. I've got this, luckily, I've got a voice memo here as well, just in case. So there's no stress. That's not happened before, but it says it's still recording. So hopefully it's still got all of that data. If not, Eric, I've got it all here on voice too. So we're sweet as. The only thing we'd lose is the visual, but it says we're still recording. So I'm hoping we're still good. We'll keep rocking and rolling. If you're cool with that. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, if you're fine with it, I'll pick up where I was. So yeah, for those 2 weeks where I was at 1,200 calories, I was losing, closer to 1.5, 2 pounds a week. And at the end of it, I looked up and I was in shape. I was shredded, and we were able to bring my calories up from there, which was perfect timing, because when I was a week out from my first show, I was speaking at the Ultimate Evidence-Based Conference in Melbourne. I needed to be on point for that, and I had brought up my calories from 1,200 to immediately we went to 1,600. And even though that was probably still a deficit, night and day to 1,200. 400 calorie increase on 5 days. That's 2,000 additional calories per week. And then that week I felt better, leaned out even more, dropped some stress-related water, filled out a bit, and we were like, yeah, you really are in shape. We went up to 1,900. From there we just basically walked up my calories 150 on my low days per week, which is relatively aggressive. And I just looked better and better and better. I just kept dropping or maintaining. And that's when I spoke. I did a little bit of a photo shoot and a training session with Jeff Nippard at the UBC. And when I saw those pictures, I was like, holy shit, I am shredded. And it just kind of blew my mind. It almost didn't feel like it was real. Like I had never seen my physique look like that. I had a little bit of that in April, just because I put on, 8 years of training muscle mass and more symmetry and muscularity. I was like, wow, I really look like a bodybuilder finally, not just kind of a lean guy who might lift at least with his legs. And that was really cool. And I was like, well, I legit look good. Like I look like I'm a threat for a pro card now. And I had a lot of confidence, and that was just a really, really good thing to see. And that game plan really paid off, because it allowed me, with my life constraints, my personal preference, and me seeing the light at the end of the tunnel for a 4-week push, instead of thinking, man, I've got to push May, June, and July, half of April, all of May, all of June, and then a week of July. 10 weeks just seemed very daunting with what I had to do in my regular life. But I could see 4 weeks just getting dirty and grimy, nasty and ugly, and let's just get some suffering and get it done, and just really let's hate life for a month. I was good with that. And Berto was like, all right, man. And he posted on his Instagram this video of a wide receiver going out for a pass, cutting across the middle, and getting just absolutely clobbered by a linebacker, but catching it and getting the first down. And if that made no sense to someone who's not familiar with American football, basically that's a play where you're going to get your first down if the person can hold on to the ball, but you're exposing that wide receiver to getting destroyed. And he's like, this is the coaching call I had to make today. And then I got Helms' permission. He's going across the middle, and we know he's going to get clobbered, but it's worth it. And that was kind of the thing we did. On paper, it would make no sense to give a 6-foot bodybuilder 1,200 calories on low days. That's low for a bikini competitor, Yeah. But the downsides of that, losing some muscle mass, losing some sanity, seeing your metabolic rate slow down, dropping a shit ton of meat, looking worse, and being on a very restrictive diet, Yeah, that is what it is. But if you accept that and then you realize that you've then got months of eating up into shows, it really paid off. My performance came back, my fullness came back. I started looking more and more and more ridiculous, and it was a very strategic move. And people were in shock that I was a week out presenting at the UEBC on stage, animated, not looking like a zombie, eating at restaurants with them and having no issue with that because I had so much flexibility being on 1,900 to 2,400 calories during that last phase on low days, which for me is a lot. And then having, 2 to 3 days, 24 to 2,800. And I essentially didn't have to worry about my peak weeks either. In July and in my 2 shows in July, we're just increasing calories daily. And it was just a matter of, yeah, exactly. There was no dip down, drive up like I did for my first 2 shows. When I went into the Mayhem, it was just a question of should we be at 24, 25, 26, 27, or 2,800 calories. And then on the game, on the day of, am I a little filmy and spilled over because I'm so damn full? Do you pull back a little bit, or not? And I went into, I basically rocked up into the Mayhem on just this linear load. I went from 2,400 early in the week all the way up to 2,800 the day prior. And like people are asking me, was that a refeed? Like, I don't know. All my days were refeeds at that point. We were just basically playing with finding what maintenance looked like. And every morning I would take a video of myself and send it to Berto. And I looked the same, shredded and full. And it was kind of like, I remember texting him. I'd send him a video and I go, put me in, coach, I'm ready. Like every day could be game day. There's no peak for me. I'm just looking my best. And I actually had very little food on the day of the Mayhem, which also is something that's very unconventional. I had 2,800 calories a day prior, and then I think throughout the whole day, I basically only ate for prejudging, and then just had a little bit here and there to keep the look for finals because I had filled out so much. We didn't want to push it too far and spill. So, yeah, my whole experience going into the last show, people would ask me like, "How are you doing? You're only a couple weeks out," and I was like, dude, it's the first week of August. I was suffering back in June. I'm fine. I mean, I'm not fine. Don't get me wrong. I don't sleep through the night. I haven't had libido since April, and I'm definitely hormonally compromised. Like I'm shredded, but I am. There's a difference between being shredded and eating 1,200 calories and being shredded and eating 2,400 calories, and they're night and day. I can tell you what. Those are like, in my opinion, 2 independent stressors. So I had essentially finished my reverse diet before the season was over, without gaining any body fat. So I was in the best position I could have been, but through very non-conventional means at a certain point, at least to the outside observer. But a highly individualized approach with context to my job, my travel schedule, my personal preferences, and the experiences I'd had previously, that we see that I do respond well to when calories come up.
And it's a bit of a niche when we talk about the peak week and getting peaking right. It's an art in itself, which you've talked about. I was in conversation with Dr. Joe Klemczewski, and he has this this approach that he he gets his clients to eat up into the competition, and it sounds like there was some similar derivatives there. And for me, from what I've learned in my shorter time within the industry, is that seems to be like a better approach, not only from a logical standpoint, but also from an emotional one in terms of how you can conduct yourself. It is almost better to go, well, look, because at some point, as you know, Eric, you got to embrace the suck. That's just bodybuilding, right? And it's not easy. I don't think it's kind of like lifting. People say, it doesn't get easy, you get stronger. And I think that's similar with bodybuilding. It doesn't get easy. You just get better at managing it. Like every time you sort of have better food choices, you have better strategies, and we'll talk about, how to maintain your relationships, because I think that's really important too. So it's almost like a stealth thread, people don't really know till you start looking like really gaunty, and you're like, hey man, you look like a victim there.
Are you sick? No, I'm just a competitive bodybuilder and I can no longer hide it,
Pretty much. But at the same time, I'm fully sick, bro. Yeah.
Sick as, mate. Yeah,
that's it, bro. That's what they say over here. I think, it's sick. It's like, it's a good thing. But yeah, having that ability to walk your calories up, it seems more reliable, because there was an analogy used. Say, for example, you have a pool. You have a pool in your backyard, and you've got to fill that pool up. That's going to take so long to fill up, and that, in this instance, is your carbohydrate or your glycogen stores. And if you're going to basically run it to nothing, and then you've got to try and guess without a front load or a back load, and it seems kind of counterintuitive, where, much like yourself, how about walking it up in a more linear approach where you can go, well, hey, coach, we look really good. We look really good the next day, and we go, right, well, and there's less variance, so you're really just topping up. Maybe even find that limit. You're less likely to spill over. It just seems, even from my mind, a much more strategic approach. And not only that, but you look and feel so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, beautiful. Sorry, I think we just had technical difficulty, but we're all good. We're back. We're here. What are the main things, to springboard off that, in this prep? What are the most valuable things you taken out of it, from not only a coaching standpoint, but more of a perhaps experience standpoint versus your previous preps? And what would you perhaps do next time you compete, or whenever that may be?
For sure. I think that's a great question. And I think one of the biggest things I took away from this is that to not put optimal in a box. And what I mean by that is to not try to cordon off your life and think that bodybuilding occurs in a vacuum. So I'll give you an example, like someone who is only thinking about where they place their refeeds based on whether it'll get the best hormonal response, support their training, etc. Right? I instead look at it like, Wednesday I've got all day meetings at AUT, and no, on paper it might make more sense because Wednesday's an off day from my days on Saturday, Sunday, when I have my two hardest training days and have cardio, and I want to have 2 days in a row and have a 48-hour refeed for all these theoretical reasons. Mm-hmm. But I know that if I do a shitty job with my students, and if I don't do well for this presentation, if I'm not present, and if I'm short with my colleagues, I'm missing all these important things that are going to cause me more stress down the line. It's actually going to hurt my bodybuilding career in an indirect way. So no, I'm going to have my refeed on Wednesday this week. So it's more like managing my energy intake and my carbohydrates around life to support the fact that my life right now is also in prep, rather than seeing them as two separate things, which I think is kind of the default. People, especially kind of online coaches, when there's a bit of a disconnect between you and your client, you think, right, you go ahead and just manage your life, whatever, but here's what I need from you. These are your refeed days. These are your low days. Here's your training schedule, etc. And figure it out. Manage your life around that, rather than taking a more integrated approach where you ask them, hey, what are your regular demands? Or giving them more flexible things like, hey, I want you to have a variable high day. Get anywhere, or hey, you've got 5 training days, but you can place them where you want in the week. You can move your off days around, etc. So essentially, knowing which things should be flexible and why, that's something I'm more going to start. So I think kind of looking at my energy intake in a more fluid state of what's going on in my life right now, and planning around my first show in July and be at UEBC, and then be a week out at the European Powerlifting Conference from my show in August. But maybe I wouldn't have done that if I'd really kind of thought about it in advance. It worked. I was able to be flexible around it, which is saying something. But was it optimal? Was it ideal? I don't have control over the show schedules, but maybe I would have made different decisions. But I think just kind of, that was something I learned during the prep, and and I think now going into my next prep, I could even just leverage that big rock even more to where, like you said, the stealth prep would be even stealthier, So I think, because that is the goal for me, is to there is inherent sacrifice anytime you do something. There's no way around it. And I know that a prep will affect the people around me in some way. but to minimize that as much as possible, because I'm really the only person who signed up for this. When I married my wife, I wasn't a competitive bodybuilder. I just was a guy who lifted. And then, I roped her into this whole, guess what I'm going to do, So trying to make that cost the least is always a goal of mine. So I think, that's probably the big one, would be looking at more holistic integration of the prep process into my life from the get-go. I think is what I would do next time I compete. And then some of the things that I tried that I really liked was just taking a much more was managing, like it was truly focused on just managing the variables I think need to be managed. So for example, I had a protein and calories target when I was tracking. In a certain phase, I wasn't tracking. I was just assessing my hunger levels and knowing where my energy intake was, because I can't not, and making sure I hit my protein target. And that worked really well. And I started tracking was what I needed to. And it when you're managing a smaller number to achieve a certain deficit, you've got to be a little more meticulous. Mm-hmm. And also letting my stress levels dictate my decisions. Like, I wasn't tracking because I knew tracking was a stressor. But at a certain point in prep where I was like, I need to really make some progress here. I need to manage more variables, and I've got to get to this elite level of conditioning, and my body's less predictable. It felt better to track because it gave me kind of this feeling of a safety blanket. Like, okay, I'm doing everything I can. Like, I don't know if that sauteed spinach at the restaurant was cooked with oil or not. And it's only 50 calories, but shit, 50 calories is a lot when you're only eating 1,200. So let me actually track that and assume it had fat, write it down, and then I make sure I'm at no more than 1,200. Worst case scenario, I'm at 1,150, and then hey, we're getting dirty anyway. So kind of having the approach be dictated by what helps me manage my stress better, and the situations and the context of what phase of prep I'm in. All of those things I think were good decisions. And another really good decision I made was to bring on Berto after the kind of the early phase of prep. I'd say I brought him on officially as like, hey man, will you coach me like in March? Because I was stage ready, like legally shredded in March. And that was the point where I knew my objectivity was not as good as it was. I've been dieting 12, 16 weeks, somewhere in there. It was mid-December start. I think I'd been dieting 14 weeks. And then for the final 6 weeks going into my first show and then the rest of the season, I was checking with Berto weekly. And a lot of the times he was just co-signing what my game plan was, or it was just, little things. But sometimes he'd tell me, hey, dude, like, are you sure you had your 2 refeeds? Because you look flat as shit. And I'm just looking at, okay, I got to get shredded. And I'm staring at the fact that I don't have striations in the top of my glutes, and ignoring the fact that my whole body is super depleted. And maybe that's why. And, he gives me an extra day of refeeds. The next week, I'm like, oh, well, there's some new vascularity in lines. And I was just being a little too uber focused on one thing and throwing the baby out with the bathwater a little bit. So having that objective second pair of eyes to help me make the right decision more consistently, and just to give me a little more data, even if I end up being the final arbiter of the decision. And then at the later stages, when I'm actually pretty stressed out and nervous, and I'm in a position where, man, I might get a WNBF pro card, and then I got to think about doing a pro show, and I start to get this kind of pressure on my shoulders. That's when I can just become the soldier and just be like, hey, Berto, I tried. I'm the intrinsic rewards are that cherry is becoming a larger and larger cherry right now, and it's distracting me from being objective. So I want you to make the calls here. So kind of moving him from a position of having his hand on my shoulder behind me to then standing in front of me and leading me forward was definitely needed at times as well.
Yeah, I think as you go through prep, no matter how experienced you become, it is invaluable to have that support, those fresh pair of eyes from a fellow coach, mentor, someone else, because although we do get better, like you said, you become less objective, and you might not see what you're thinking, and you'll look back, and I'm sure you will, you'll look back on your photos, and you already have done, but you'll look back in 6 months and probably see things that you'd not recognized and go, oh wow, there's this and there's that, and you sort of deconstruct it. And I think that's what a lot of competitors do, and it's a good thing, because you sort of go back over when you've got more food, you know, you're thinking a little bit clearer, you're a little bit sharper. And that's when I think you get this almost secondary wave, if you like, of kind of like wisdom and learning. And this is,
yes.
I'm just speaking from myself and what I've observed here from other athletes. And I think that's when you can kind of put the two and two together, really sit back, and it's good to have almost a debrief, if you will, with your coach, and sort of look at, hey, you know, what really worked, what could we do better, and then even sort of keeping that and noting it down, because I think it's all valuable data for the athlete. You know, you talk about Jeff, someone who's competed, you know, multitudes of times, and you just think, man, you just can't buy that experience at that level. You know what I'm
100%.
Yeah. If you could, this one's a little bit different. If you could go back and speak to your younger self at your first competition, and you only had a couple of minutes to sit down with the younger Eric, what would be the main things, apart from maybe some of the things you've mentioned, that you'd sort of say to him if you just had a few minutes and you could just sort of freeze time, go back and say, hey, look, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think the lines of don't forget this feeling of being backstage and loving this community and meeting people and finding enjoyment and looking. Because I remember specifically sitting backstage at the Silver and Black Muscle Classic in 2007, and I didn't know this, but I was over-oiled, spilled over, and had poor tanner. Really, I was mirrored with my upper body up, not my legs. I couldn't see how I'd kind of spilled over, and and just it was the best I'd ever looked at the time, but it was also the worst I had ever looked or would ever look on stage. And I was just thinking about all the suffering, in retrospect, unnecessary suffering and silly things I'd done. Mm-hmm. But I was just like, wow, I can't believe I freaking did this. I followed through. And then I would walk up to myself and say, remember this right here. This is everything. When you go out on stage, that's something else. But this is the nugget I want you to hold on to, because, you know, I had things that caused me stress and pressure, and core element that is really where I find enjoyment and value from the sport. You know, pushing yourself to an uncomfortable place and finding a new level of self-efficacy was really where I get the enjoyment, and then making connection with other people who understand that as well. That's everything, or almost everything, and trying to get me just to anchor that even more. Like, I have the memory, obviously, like it's there, and I'm still competing for that reason. But to kind of really get me to sink my teeth into that a bit more would be what I would say.
Yeah. I think it does seem like a lot of competitors, to circle back to something you said earlier in the conversation, what is the reason why that Masters competitor is still on stage at that age? And excuse me, this is very much a lifestyle, and it isn't for everybody. Sometimes people will dabble, and that's completely fine. And if someone wants to sort of go, you know what, I've done a CrossFit competition and I want to do a bodybuilding competition, etc., this is great, and hopefully they have a good experience with it. But for someone who lifts weights, it isn't just about, you know, lifting weights. It's so much more. And this is, again, something that it really strikes a chord with me, because I see people backstage, or I see people come in and they don't really enjoy it, or they leave with a bad taste in their mouth. And I think it's because they've sort of rushed it. They've been too, you know, quote unquote hardcore, if you will, and they've not had a chance to sort of sit back and speak to the athletes. And if you do compete, you know, speak to the competitors who are open, listen, enjoy the day. As many people listening know, and yourself, Eric, it goes really fast. I mean, you do all these months of prep. You know, we spend all this time in the off season to get on stage for what? A few minutes, and, you know, collectively put that together. Sometimes it's a little bit longer. And if you're with an organization that does a show, which I know you've done yourself, shout out to the dance moves. You know, you get to display yourself, and it is a form of art, which is not getting its credit, I think. And I think having that separation where, you know, we can say to, hey, people, look, you can, if you really love this, like, and, you know, give it a fair go, enjoy the whole experience. And yeah, I think that's something that needs to be talked about more, because it's very, again, binary. It's sort of like, I'm hardcore, I'm a bodybuilder, I'm in my box, and that's it. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. Like, anyone who lifts, we've got something in common. But at the same time, don't forget that, you know, you've got community, you've got relationships as well. Like, enjoy the journey, because it is very much a marathon, not a sprint. So I think that's really important. And again, to get to my point, because I'm sort of squandering it, you said purpose earlier. You need purpose, and that's very important, because I think that's the difference between that person who continues to do this for the rest of their life, because it gives them purpose. They go to the gym, they exercise regardless, because it's part of their day. It's just like breathing. It's like you have a habit, you have a routine. It just becomes normal. My dad is an example. He's in his 50s and he trains, and, you know, he looks phenomenal. Credit where it's due for someone his age. He's never took any performance enhancing drugs. Again, nothing against people who do, but because he loves it and he does it for himself. And you sort of, it's like the Jeff Alberts of the industry as well. You see these guys and they just look phenomenal, but it's not too much of an effort for them, because they love it and they have just continued to chip away and chip away and chip away, and then they have these amazing physiques. So I think it's really important that you've mentioned that. And then obviously going back, it's quite sentimental, because a lot of people wouldn't have picked that a bit of information that you would have taught to yourself about. Perhaps they would have thought, oh, you would have give yourself some actual, you know, practices, like do this with your carbs or do this with your prep. But
you can eat fat and carbs together, bro. Don't you know that?
Yeah.
What a waste that would have been, you know, of actually, yeah, it's the difference between understanding the value of what you're doing and doing it slightly better, because #science, you know, like that's, it's kind of like how we misunderstand what makes a good coach. A good coach is not dictated by what methods they use. Or we could just simply say every coach in 1990 was shit because they didn't have the information we have now. That's not true. No, your methods are your methods. Being a good coach is about building a relationship, right? And the same thing goes as far as being a good athlete. Sure, you could dictate that by your external experience, but I'll give a powerlifting example. If you go, 4 for 9 and win the world championships, you're strong, but you're not a good powerlifter. You don't have sport mastery is what I'm getting at. And mastery is something that kind of sits outside of the external performance. Like if you see a Masters 1 competitor who places 10th at Worlds, but goes, 7, 8, or 9 out of 9, and the times when they miss a lift, it's because they're pushing to move a placement up, or because they're right on the cusp of their maximum potential on that day, and they're close to it, but their form is impeccable. Their warm-ups are perfectly timed. They made weight perfectly, rehydrated. Like everything they're doing is this perfect expression of maximizing their version of what they can do. That is someone who's a master of sport, regardless of whether they place first or 10th. And when that coincides with talent, that's when you get 8-time Mr. Olympias. That's when you get these freaks who are unstoppable, and it's just a matter of when they retire, someone else gets to win. But my point is that occurs in all facets. There's a saying in one of the books I've read that had an Eastern philosophy tint that I think basically it translates to through one thing is all things. So whether you're a sushi chef, or whether you're a race car driver, or whether you're a bodybuilder, or whether you are a discus coach, finding mastery and putting your all through this one thing, it teaches you that, man, there's a way more gray than there is black and white, and that there is a certain level of experiential knowledge you can attain that gives you an understanding of the depth of all things. It kind of lets you just see, like, oh man, am I Dunning-Krugering it everywhere else in my life? And you realize that there is a certain level of fulfillment that you get from focusing on the process and immersing yourself in something and attaining a very, very high level of in-depth understanding and immersion with a skill or a talent or a task or something like that. And I think that has intrinsic value. And if I could science on you a little bit again, I'll do the quick rapid fire summary of a study, kind of in line with that same one where those researchers ruined the lives of those preschoolers. There was another study similar in nature that didn't ruin the
one, is it?
yeah. So that one was probably pre-IRBs, if I had to guess, back in the 70s. But this one was much more recent. And they said when goal pursuit undermines goal attainment. I think it might be the title of it. Good title, because it really speaks to the heart of it. And they had, again, that same concept of through one thing, all things. They did a series of studies. One was on treadmill running. One was on origami folding. One was on yoga. And then there was one other task that I can't remember. But the only really truly relevant one for exercise, but they're all relevant, was the treadmill running one. And essentially what they had was they had people either focus on the goal they had of why they were doing cardio. Mm-hmm. I want to lose weight, be healthier because my doctor wants me off my medication or whatever. Or what they get intrinsically while they're running. What do they enjoy about it? I feel like I started my day off right. I feel like I'm doing something good for my body. I enjoy the feeling of running. That one I don't get, but good for those people. So whatever it is in the process that they actually enjoyed, they would focus on, and that's where they were told to give their intentional focus. All they're from running. Those are the way it works. Already bad at can go with current act. And so you think about an ice age. It wasn't by thinking about planning for the community, it was by hunting right now. So anyway, so in this study, they had what helps us survive, as originally we were just basically any other prey creature. We just had the ability to make tools and build things and learn over time. Oh crap, there's a predator, I should climb that tree. Not, maybe I should tame this animal and make them dogs. And we did that. But it's much more normal for us to make quick decisions and react to the immediate reward. And it's only now in a modern society where it makes more sense for us to have delayed gratification. It was familiar with the marshmallow test. They had this study where the kids who were able to not have the extra marshmallow now got one more marshmallow later, and that predicted success later in life, right? So anyway, those who can delay gratification typically are more successful. So, and that's an element of all of us. So in this study, they had two groups, treadmill. One focus on what they're going to get out of it, one focus on the experience itself. So the process versus goal. And the different variable was that they got to run a selected time period and then also estimate how long they thought they were going to run. So you've got these two groups are on the treadmill, and beyond one focusing on the goal attainment from running and the other one focusing on the process enjoyment, the difference or the variable that we're looking to see how that affected was they predicted how long they'd run for, and then they ran for a just self-determined amount of time. And in the group that was focused on their goals, they predicted a longer amount of time and then ran for less. And in the group that was focused on the process, they didn't predict they'd run for very long, but they ran longer than they predicted, and more importantly, longer than the group that was focused on their goal. So being process-oriented made them actually exceed their expectations and exceed the group that was focused on the goal. So it's much more fatiguing to think about what's going to happen from running years from now or months from now or even weeks from now than it is to focus on the process of just putting one foot in front of the other. Mm-hmm. And to quote a track and field coach's adage, you don't win the race by looking into the lane. You just focus on your lane and you succeed. And this is even more true in individual sport, where short of taking a bat to someone's knee backstage in individual sport, all you can do is be the best version of yourself. And that's true of bodybuilding, powerlifting, CrossFit, etc. No one cares if you won the the Northeast Coast powerlifting 198 class competition with you and one other person in it, they care about what was your Wilks score and did that qualify you for nationals or what have you, that kind of thing. So I think that's a really important thing to remember, is that the process focus, not only does that give you that sustainability, not only does it give you that purpose, not only does it keep you in the moment, enjoying it, keeping you in that flow state, but it also helps you attain your goals better. So sometimes when I'm talking to bodybuilders who have that kind of all or nothing, hardcore, I'm not going to compete if I'm not here to win, brother, kind of mentality, as I say, well, great, but maybe that's actually not the best way to get to your goal. So that's kind of how I kind of slip my foot in the door when I'm talking to these very black and white, rigid athletes who I sometimes get the pleasure of working with, is the first step is to make them realize that being all-encompassed and focused on winning is actually not the best way to win. And that expands their mind just enough for them to maybe take a look at some of those other aspects that, oh, maybe I have been neglecting my marriage, or maybe I have been holding myself back in these other aspects of my life, or maybe I could take a more holistic approach, or maybe my relationship with food isn't just because I'm a bodybuilder, but is actually problematic and causing me stress in other aspects of my life. So it just cracks that window open so they can start to look out and see a broader world. And then it allows us to make some new further insights, and I can kind of lead that horse to water, and hopefully they're more likely to drink at that point.
It's a subtle way, like you said, of just digressing in there, because there's definitely a way to approach it, just like when you're approaching someone in a gym setting and perhaps they're doing something dangerous, and you know, as a coach, you may feel obligated. I know a lot of people are slightly intimidated to be able to go in and open that person's mind up by saying, you know, not, hey, that's stupid, you're doing it wrong. It's like, no. I mean, that's not nice anyway. But hey, have you perhaps tried or seen this? You know, to that effect, just to sort of take them off that initial thought process, and perhaps, like you said, expand their mind to perhaps there is other ways to do this. And interesting point you made there, Eric, when you talk about that, the irony between, you know, focusing on oneself, but it's obviously a better way to derive more out of the experience. It is true. And it's somewhat comical in bodybuilding, because it's the way it's advertised is, you know, you're up on stage, and if you think about it, it's one of the most egotistical, vain sports out there. But it is that way if that's the way you take it, and that's the approach you take, which unfortunately I think the majority of physique competitors do, because it's for the Instagram photo, it's for the validation, etc. And perhaps that first time around they do it for that reason, but hopefully then if they continue, and hopefully they do continue to do it, it's not about that, because again, it is about you versus you. And that's not by no means a cop-out, because some people go, oh, you know, you do want to be competitive, but if you want to be competitive, focus on beating yourself, because you can't control what you can't control. There's always going to be someone bigger and more shredded. So don't worry about it. If you focus on doing your best and you make improvements over time, I think that's what's important, and that's what will derive that, you know, internal value, and probably keep you going and have a better relationship with the sport, and then also the people around you too. And I think that's important going forward into the future, because as you know, Eric, the standard is just getting higher and higher and higher. And now, you know, in bodybuilding, if you ain't got shredded glutes, you know, like you said, you ain't legally shredded, brother. Like you gotta be standing up there with that. But another important point I'll make before we move on to the last round of questions is one of my good friends, fellow coaches, and someone I look up to greatly, Nathan Wallace. He was, we had a bit of a conversation during my prep back last year, and I was at a point where I had started having some lines in my glutes, and he was watching my posing, and I said to Nathan, I said, oh, how do you think I'm doing? You know, like, can you give me your feedback so far? And, you know, he sort of did, and I said, you know, I'm feeling like this. Should I push more? And he says, well, and then I really thank him for this. He says, well, you can do two things, Alex. He says, you can push more, he says, but remember, this is your first competition. You know, 9 times out of 10, you know, you do love this. You're probably going to compete again. You could push more to the point where you make yourself look worse and feel worse, or you could hold back. You might not be as shredded, but you might have a better time. And because it is your first time, to some degree, you're going to be able to get to this point next time better. So each time make those improvements. So we said it's not just about, and we are our own worst critics. So I'm there. I'm like, well, kill me. Like, let's go, let's push. And sometimes he said, to push, it's better to ease back. And I think you've talked about that. And lo and behold, you add some more calories in, you de-stress, you might get a little bit of better sleep, you can push more, in the gym, and oh wow, I look better, and shit, like there's another line, that's some more vascularity. So really, really good points, Eric, that you make. The next set of questions, so usually what I'll do is I have some rapid fire questions I like to ask. They're a bit more fun, they're a bit more lighthearted. I know you'll enjoy these ones before my final question, which is a bit more serious. So with these, Eric, whatever comes to mind first, one of the questions I like to ask is, if you had a superpower, what would it be and why?
That's a good one. So many good superpowers out there. I would probably prefer to be invisible, and not because I want to like stalk and see naked ladies or anything like that. Again, I don't even have libido from my prep, so not because I'm a creeper, but just to be able to really be in the moment and experience things and not necessarily have to, just sometimes to be the true observer, the true lurker that can be fun online. To be able to do that in life, I think there'd be a lot of value in that.
Wow. Yeah, like a fly on the proverbial wall.
Yeah, and it's probably mostly a side effect of not realizing that I would keep growing my profile. I'm a little intimidated by that. I've crossed like the 100K mark on Instagram. Like, I'm just trying to talk about bodybuilding here. This is weird. So that's probably a fear-based decision, but I'm going with it for now. So yeah.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Let's stick with it. If you could meet any person, anyone dead or alive, you could have dinner with them, who would it be?
No, that's tough. That's really tough. I think Albert Einstein. I'd love to, because he wasn't just obviously a brilliant physicist, but he had some gems that he would drop that I've always been impressed by. Like his quote, "If you can't explain something simply, you don't know it well enough." That's just so true. And he has these quote unquote truisms that kind of transcend being a physicist, which I would love to get inside that big dome of his.
A clever man. I was listening to Matthew Walker's book, the Why We Sleep, phenomenal read. And he was referencing some of the great minds, and they used to have they'd make chairs, or they'd have like these tins with marbles in their hand. So then they would sleep, they would wake up, and they could write down their equations. And just little things like that, how they were so ahead of the trend, or they might have not knew the principle, but they were onto something. So I think that would be a really interesting conversation, a good pick. All right, this one's a bit more appropriate for your situation. What is your absolute favorite food? Now, let me context it. If you could have one last meal, what would it be? It's your last meal. You can have dinner, you can have dessert, whatever you like. What would it be? And I know you're in still comp rep mind, so just bring on the food, baby.
Yeah, I'm only like 15 days post-show, so post-season. So this is definitely a different answer than normally. If you'd ask me in the middle of the off-season, I'd probably say like, nachos, and it wouldn't be too attached to it. Right now, I don't know. I've had this massive sweet tooth, so I would probably want to have something like chocolate pancakes. And not just like the pancakes where you put the little chocolates on top, but like where they actually make the batter with chocolate built in. And then like just a smorgasbord of different toppings for said pancakes. Sounds good right now. So I'm still starving apparently.
Yeah. What did you have, or what treats have you had since you've finished competing?
So I didn't have a binge post show. I just we went out and we had just a meal, and I had an appetizer, dessert, and shared some of my wife's food. Had some tiramisu afterwards. I had I think I had a white fish with risotto, and then the appetizer was these like halloumi bao buns, which are really fluffy Asian style buns with halloumi and some sauce in them, and then. I had a little bit of my wife's, I think she had like a veggie burger, and then we had tiramisu. So it was delicious. It was great, but it was it was more like eating on vacation rather than, eating 4 meals until you're uncomfortably sick and have to sleep in a chair because you can't lay down like many competitors have. And then I really honestly, the next day I had 3 square meals, but I ate out for like all 3, and that was kind of just fun. And then since the Monday after the show, I've had the same structure with just higher portion sizes, and then just having treats when I want them, but having them be truly treats, not blowouts. So, for example, we just went and had a cafe breakfast like we often do. Well, my wife and I take a walk, get in 3 to 6K steps, depending on how far we want to walk. We go to a cafe, and I'll have like the standard kind of big breakfast, but of mostly really healthy stuff. Like I have grilled tomato, sauteed mushroom, sauteed spinach, 2 poached eggs, smoked salmon, and a couple slices of toast. So it's a lot of food, but it's like 600 calories. None of that shit has much in it. And then on the way back, I decided to get a caramel slice from a cafe we walked by.
Whew. And those New Zealand caramel slices from memory. Now they're good. Now that's a different kind of league in New Zealand.
Absolutely. People don't know about that. No. But again, I got a slice, not like, let me get one of everything, So it really is a treat. And then for lunch, I'll probably have like soup, carrot, a couple of pieces of fruit, and some Greek yogurt. Like it's very much the same shit I did during prep. Higher portion sizes and slightly higher fat and carb versions. And then when I'm feeling snacky, I'll have a snack. And the goal has been to gain weight. So it's not a big deal. I'm 7 kilos up from my stage weight. Probably half of that's water. So the recovery diet's going well. I still look good. Like I don't look ridiculous. I'm not ready to get on stage and do well, but at the same time, there's no reason to look like that. No.
Exactly. That's kind of the goal, right? It's good that you got that relationship and that experience. Like you said, it's not premeditated, the treat. It's like, you know what? I feel like that. I'm gonna go eat that. I'm just not gonna go eat it till I'm sick. I'm just gonna enjoy it. And I think something that only comp prep competitors, physique competitors who are listening will appreciate is the fact that sometimes it's not about the treats. It's just, you know what? I'm eating the same food. I'm just having more of it, and it's so damn good. I remember for me, I just wanted a big bowl of oats with banana.
Mm-hmm. And not weigh it, right? Yeah. Just have as many oats as you wanted. Yeah,
it was. That was that's a strange feeling. Like, I'm not weighing this, because as you said, the fruit choices. You go from your more high carb fruits to your berries, and you. It's the simple pleasures. So no, it's good, and I'm glad to hear that the recovery diet's going well, which is great. Now to my last question, it's a little bit more serious. It's something that I ask all my guests. It can be completely related to what we've talked about, or it can completely disconnected. It's up to you. And it is: could you identify a fear, a major fear that you've had in your life, Eric, and talk us through what it was and how you overcame it and what you learned from that experience, please?
Yeah, this is an easy one because it's one I still struggle with, and it's probably related to that invisibility thing. It's basically getting too popular or too famous. And I think there is a strange sense of when you, it's probably individual for each person, reach a certain level of exposure as someone who's trying to be a public figure in whatever field that is, whether that's an athlete, because I've had athletes who, they're just people who happen to be really friggin' strong or really, really, really good natural talent. And now everyone knows who they are because they've succeeded. And they never really signed up for that. They just wanted to be successful in their athletic endeavor of choice, not necessarily, be known by everyone and be talked about out there. So for example, I'm going to express kind of what makes me uncomfortable. I remember the very first time it happened, I was being interviewed by Matt Ogus, the athlete I coached in 2011, 2012, and this video went pretty viral for kind of the metrics at the time. And there was people talking about me and having opinions about me as though I wasn't going to read the comments or couldn't, or that I was some external person. And it just made me feel like, whoa, people who don't know me are talking about me as like they're an authority on me. I think when you just have private relationships and you know the people you have met in person in kind of the pre-social media era, of course, we still had opinions about quote unquote celebrities or people like that. And we would talk about, talk shit about Mariah Carey over breakfast or something like that. Yeah. But there's no way for her to get exposed to that, Now it's just right there. So for example, I have made Instagram posts where people are talking about me in the comments of my post and answering each other's questions about me. And I'm just kind of like, you could just, I'm right here. You could just ask me. I'm a human, Yeah. So there's almost this sense that I have a fear that with growing exposure, that I have less control over who I'm seen to be. Like I know who I am, but there's people who don't know me who have thoughts, opinions, and perspectives on who I am. And that just feels odd. And it makes me almost feel like I don't have control over who I am, which isn't true. So it is a fear. And I think the way I overcame that fear and the process of that I still am engaging in to overcome it is reminding myself of my mission statement. And that I'm not trying to be famous to be Eric Helms famous, right? I'm not trying to be known. I don't have a desire for celebrity or fame. I'm trying to expand my platform so that I can help more people. And when I remind myself of that, the fear very much dissipates because it's not about me. It's about what message can I give out? What utility and value can I add? And the growth of my Instagram or the growth of my Facebook or the growth of our podcast, et cetera, is not for my ego, which is the fragile part that is afraid of getting misrepresented and not having a lot of people like me. Rather, it is for the spread of good information and utility and service of helping others. And that does more than just solve that fear. It also keeps me on point, where I don't buy into my own hype. I don't feed into that dopamine drip of having more likes and more follows and think, maybe I am the fucking man. Like maybe I do deserve all this fame and accolades. That does feel good, which then puts you in that fragile space to do things that are counter to your mission statement, alienate people, and then to have people, your reputation get destroyed or to do things that are from a place of ego. And that's where you get trapped, The fame, quote unquote, gets to you, and then you are out of control. And your identity is no longer matching your values, and you have a perception that's out there that's different than your self-perception. And now you all of a sudden feel betrayed or not a part of the community you tried to help create. But if your mission statement is always at the forefront and you make your decisions based on the fact that you're coming from a place of service, that's when you feel I wouldn't say the pressure, but the responsibility of your mission statement, the responsibility of, for example, if I am being a science communicator, that means I need to accurately represent science. I need to be honest and have integrity related to that. I'm not going to abuse the platform I've gotten through being an expert in nutrition and training to whatever degree I am by now talking about political views or ranting or flaming someone. I was given this platform. People have chosen to click follow because they think I can help them. And if I'm not using that platform for the original purpose, that's almost an abuse in my mind. So having that mission statement, it keeps me honest, it keeps me from doing dumb shit, and it also makes me a lot less afraid, and it helps me make posts that matter rather than just, let me find an excuse to take a picture with my shirt off, or let me just turn my entire Instagram into a series of commercials to make money. When I go, well, hold on, not everyone can afford or is going to spend money on this. I need to have some paid products, because what I do does have value and I should get something out of that. And I do need to live and buy groceries. And I would like to, hashtag live my best life. But for the most part, I need to be putting out a lot of really, really good content in a much greater proportion to what might be paid. So all of those things, those are just examples, are the side benefits of addressing that fear with my mission statement. So hopefully to anyone who is, which is almost anyone in any profession now, whether you are a brick and mortar gym owner, you want 10K followers on Instagram, or whether you are trying to get 10K followers on Instagram because you're trying to get 10K followers, I think having that understanding of know your mission statement, and it will keep you honest, and it will keep you centered, and it will keep you valuable, and keep you providing meaning to people rather than getting eaten up by your own ego, I think is the lesson I'd like to provide there.
Yeah. And what a great one it is, and what a beautiful summary of the conversation that we've had, Eric, and I know that it's not only my belief, but the belief of many others as well. And I think you're a great example of someone who is a science communicator who's staying true to their values and ethics. And I think they're key words in this as well, because again, at the end of the day, you're just trying to do something that you're passionate about. You're trying to create and make a positive difference to the platform. So for anyone who does come in contact with your content, they're going to derive something valuable out of it. And again, we live in a very superficial world now. And it is easy to get caught up, when you get those followers and those likes and whatnot. But staying true, I think, is the difference over time, because we see a lot of people kind of sell out to a degree, if I can use, for a lack of better words. But going back to those values, making sure you are staying qualitative as well. And hey, look, if that means that you are going to get 1 million followers on Instagram, be it as it may, but at least it's come from, a real place. So it's been a pleasure, Eric. Thank you for sharing your experiences today. Thank you for, communicating the information that you do. Continue to keep up the good work. Before you go, for people who want to reach out and learn more about you, where can they find you? Instagram handles, mass, etc. What are some of those links?
Well, first, let me just say thank you. That's a very, very kind compliment, and I don't take it lightly. And thank you for having me on. Great discussion. And if people want to get more of my content, I think probably the best one-stop shop is 3dmusclejourney.com. There's links to Mass, our monthly research review from there. There's links to my books, The Muscle and Strength Pyramids. Our 3D Muscle Journey podcast is there. Our regular blog posts, all of our free content is there. For my Instagram, where I've got a lot more daily content, you can find me at Helms 3DMJ. And then for Omar and my podcast, that's Iron Culture. We're on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube. We got all those, so check it out. And yeah, that's pretty much it, man.
Thanks. Thank you. And I will, as always, I will put all those links in the description below. So for people listening or watching, whatever your favorite medium is, you can click through as well. And I can second those places are very rich in knowledge if you're into the physique sports and you want to create a more holistic approach and perhaps delve into some of these topics that me and Eric have talked through today. So Eric, thank you again. I think this is it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. There's been some great topics, perhaps an appetizer for more to come, if you will.
Absolutely.
And I'll be speaking to you, I'm sure, in the future. And guys, for those listening, thank you for tuning in as always. We really appreciate it. And we will see you next week with another episode. So in the meantime, stay fearless, and we'll be chatting to you very soon. Thanks, Eric.
You got it, man. Thanks for having me on.